contracted again. Bastien was exceptionally gifted when it came to spotting trends and making millions. He had a mind like a steel trap, and the fierce, aggressive drive of a male who had not had a wealthy family to give him his breaks. He was a self-made billionaire who had started out with nothing, and he took great pride in his independence. But just at that moment, Bastien wasn't thinking about business. No, indeed. Bastien was thinking about Delilah Moore, the only woman who had ever rejected him, leaving him tormented by lust and outraged by the frustrating new experience. His ego would have withstood the rebuff had she been genuinely uninterested in him, but Bastien knew that had not been the case. He had seen the longing in her eyes, the telling tension of her body when she was close to him, had recognized the breathy, intimate note in her voice. He could forgive much, but unquestionably not her deceitful insistence that she didn't want him. Fearlessly and foolishly judgmental, she had flung Bastien's womanizing reputation in his face with as much disdain as a fine lady dismissing the clumsy approaches of a street thug. In reaction, Bastien's rage had burned, and now, almost 2 years on, it was still smoldering at the lack of respect she had demonstrated. Not to mention her lies and her sheer nerve in daring to attack him. And now fortune had turned the tables on Delilah Moore and her family. Bastien savored the fact with dark satisfaction. He didn't believe she would be hurling defiance at him this time around. "How is he?" Lila asked her stepmother in an undertone when she spotted her father, Robert, standing outside in the backyard of her small terraced house. "Much the same." Vicky, a small, curvaceous blonde in her early 30s, groaned at the sink, where she was doing the dishes with a whinging toddler clinging to one leg. "Of course he's depressed. He worked all his life to build up the firm, and now it's gone. He feels like a failure, and being unable to get a job hasn't helped." "Hopefully something will come up soon," Lila pronounced with determined cheer as she scooped up her 2-year-old half-sister Clara and settled her down with a toy to occupy her. When life was challenging, Lila was convinced that it was best to look for even the smallest reason to be glad and celebrate it. Just then, she was busy reminding herself that, while her father had lost his business and his home, their family was still intact, and they all had their health. At the same time, Lila was marveling at the reality that she had grown so close to the stepmother she had once loathed on sight. She had assumed that Vicky was another one of the good time girls her father had once specialized in, and only slowly had she come to recognize that, regardless of their 20-year age gap, the couple were genuinely in love. Her father and Vicky had married 4 years earlier, and Lila now had 2 half-siblings she adored, 3-year-old Ben and little Clara. Currently, Lila's family was sharing her own rented home, with only 2 small bedrooms, a cramped living room, and an even tinier kitchen. It was a very tight squeeze. But until the council came up with alternative accommodation for her father and his family, or her father found a paying job, they didn't have much choice. The impressive 5-bedroom home that her father and his wife had once owned was gone now, along with the business. Everything had had to be sold to settle the loans her father had taken out in a desperate effort to keep more components afloat. "I'm still hoping that Bastien Zikos will throw your dad a lifeline," Vicky confided in a sudden burst of optimism. "I mean, nobody knows that business better than Robert, and surely there's a space somewhere in the office or the factory where your father could still make himself useful." Lila resisted the urge to remark that Bastien was more likely to tie a concrete block to her father's leg and sink him. After all, the Greek billionaire had offered to buy more components 2 years earlier, and his offer had been refused. Her father should have sold up and got out then, she thought regretfully. But the business had been doing well, and, although tempted by the offer, the older man had ultimately decided that he couldn't face stepping down. It was no consolation to Lila that Bastien himself had forecast disaster once he'd realized that the firm's prosperity depended on the retention of one very important contract.